Hello and welcome to a Holyrood Sources podcast special. Welcome to Edinburgh. We are just round the corner from the Scottish Parliament as we welcome the candidates to be the next Scottish Conservative leader to discuss and to analyse and to work out exactly what their vision is for the Scottish Conservative Party. We've got lots to talk about over the course of the next little while on the podcast, of course. We want to understand what their leadership would mean for you, for Scottish Conservative Party members, for the Scottish public, for politics, for policy making. All of that will be discussed over the course of the next little while. Of course, on the podcast, as ever, we welcome Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to First Minister Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good afternoon.
Hello. And also Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
Gosh, this must bring back all sorts of lovely memories for you.
Memories.
Leadership hustings and whatnot. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Thank you for following. Thank you for subscribing. This is what we do. We bring people together in conversation about politics and policy making. And so in a few moments, we will welcome Murdo Fraser, Megan Gallagher, and indeed Russell Findlay. We are just round the corner from the Scottish Parliament. It's a busy day. We're recording on Wednesday, the 4th of September, just ahead of the programme for government, actually, from the First Minister. So there's lots going on today, and we're glad they've been able to make some time to join us this lunchtime. Right, Andy, let's tee this thing up. Let's put this thing in context. Where are the Scottish Conservatives at right now? Where have they been historically? Where is it possible for them to get to?
Where they are right now is roughly where they have been historically. So in the first election to the Scottish Parliament, they were third with a vote share in the teens and a number of seats in the teens. I've been involved since 2002, so not long after the Parliament started in one form or another, either involved in the party or as an observer. And actually, if you look at the election result in July, that was pretty much where they also were in the teens, vote share in the teens, behind two parties of the centre-left. So in a sense, not much has changed. Obviously, there was something different in the middle, in the post-referendum years under Ruth Davidson, which we'll probably discuss. But all the indications are, if you look at the polling and think the polling is in any way accurate, the indications are that they will be in 2026 where they were in 1999, which is third with a vote share in the teens and a number of seats probably in the teens as well.
Just before we bring Geoff in, can I put this email to you from Ross, who listens to the podcast? Thank you, Ross. He says, as ever, great work, which is very nice. He says, though, I want to take issue with Andy's stance that it doesn't matter who wins the Scottish Conservative leadership contest. He partially saves himself, says Ross, by highlighting a centre-right party is significant in democratic politics. But his view that whoever wins is irrelevant because they won't be in government sounds short-sighted to me. Perhaps a question for Andy. What value does the Scottish Conservative leader deliver in opposition? Surely that value varies depending on the chosen leader, irrespective of the party's prospects of entering government. And if not, why?
I'm glad I partially redeemed myself.
Just partially, though.
It is the centre-right. It is important to have a strong centre-right. All countries, all democratic countries need a strong centre-right, whether they're in opposition or in Parliament. We saw yesterday with the financial statement, there really isn't a centre-right counterbalance fiscally in this country. We don't really have a strong enough alternative view as to how to run the economy. All other countries have it, even the Scandinavians that we talk about a lot as being very left-wing countries. That's not true. They all have strong centre-rights. They're very often in government. The reason I said it didn't matter who wins this contest, and it sounds a bit brutal the way that Ross put it, but there you go, I stand by it, is because there isn't really any evidence that the person who is the leader of the party influences the vote. I'm sure Ruth Davidson will be mentioned. She's been mentioned a lot in this campaign so far. I thought Ruth Davidson was a really, really good leader. I thought in a different world she could have been First Minister, actually, but not for this party. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at it just in terms of raw data, Ruth Davidson was leader from 2011, and then 4 years, a long time, 4 years after she became leader in the 2015 general election, the Tories got less than 15% of the vote. It was the worst result they'd ever had in a general election. And only a year later, it gets propelled into the 20s percentage and 31 seats. Now, it needs a bit of investigation as to why that happened. It happened after the SNP got almost every single seat at Westminster in 2015 and put IndyRef 2 very firmly back on the table. And at the same time, Jeremy Corbyn took over the Labour Party and said he didn't care about the union. He wasn't interested in unionism. So a whole bunch of Labour voters wet the bed and started voting for the Tory party. Now, and this continued for several elections. And then after Ruth Davidson left, Jackson Carlaw was in charge. Remember Jackson Carlaw, right? In charge for 2019 general election, 25%. Douglas Ross got the highest vote share and kept all 31 seats. So I know that we want to think that the identity and personality of the leader makes a massive difference to the vote share. There's no evidence for it, really, at all. The same Douglas Ross who got a very, very good result in 2021 just got 12.7% in July. It wasn't a different Douglas Ross, it was the same one. What was different is that independence wasn't on the table anymore. And when independence is off the table, the Scottish Tory party is off the table as well. All evidence points towards that. There isn't any evidence that points towards the leader making a difference to the vote share. So that's why I said that.
Very interesting. There you go. And thank you for your email, Ross. You can email anytime. hello@holyroodsources.com to get in touch. Geoff, you're looking very chipper, given that we've taken you to a Scottish Conservative leadership event today.
Not my natural habitat, it has to be said. I am chipper, and we'll come to the proceedings that we're about to explore shortly. But obviously, GB Energy, if BBC is to be believed, will be based in Aberdein, something that I and a lot of others have long argued for. Just last week, BP had their final financial decision on a pioneering hydrogen hub in the city. The young lady that joined us on the podcast on Friday, representing Flotation Energy, since then they've had their final approval through the AR6 funding round at Westminster, which means that project will go forward. That is the world's first commercial scale floating wind project, something that Scotland truly can be global leaders on. And tomorrow there's a stoter of an announcement on one of Scotland's largest energy companies, basing its global corporate headquarters in Aberdein as well. So my home city is having a good fist of it, despite the challenges with oil and gas and the various taxation regimes that they have to endure. But most importantly, my team, Aberdein Football Club, are sitting joint top of the Scottish Premier League. And I will noise up Murdo Fraser later on about the fact we're 5 points ahead of Rangers. Whether that reflects where his party will be interesting. I think today is really, really interesting. And I was reflecting on the element of change that's been a common thread, I think, between all the candidates. And I was listening to the STV debate the other night. Russell Finlay said he wants to change the party and get us winning again. Murdo Fraser said we can't just keep doing what we've been doing in the past. That's why I'm standing for real change. And Megan Gallagher said that we need to reset, rebuild and restore trust in the party. And that's all a theme of change. And it got me thinking about the Labour Party, who just swept to power on a message of change. I think for both of those parties, we still need to understand what that actually means. We're not seeing all of it just yet. But I thought about Kate Forbes and all of this, who was the forerunner, the pioneer in this change, when she said that, continuity wouldn't cut it as part of the leadership election with Humza Yousaf. She got vilified from lots of her own party, but perhaps she was out there in front and recognising that people out there were demanding a change from our body politics. So I think that's quite interesting. But why do the Tories need to change? Very quickly, I think the by-election in West Lothian not 2 weeks ago tells us why. Labour and SNP were level pegging. Labour won it on first preferences by a couple of votes, I believe. The Tories were in fifth place. But more alarming for them was Reform were in third place on almost 20%. Now, if you add the Tory and the Reform vote, they'll be eeksy-peeksy with the other two parties on first preferences. So there is an opportunity here. So if they can tell us what change means, establish a credible message, then maybe, just maybe, they can make a fist of the 2026 election.
Yeah. Lots more to come from Geoff and Andy. Now, just in the interests of total transparency, I say we're literally a stone's throw from the Scottish Parliament where we're recording today. And with that in mind, Russell Finlay is caught up on the Justice Committee. They're still taking evidence at the time of recording. So what's going to happen is he will show up at some point in the next few minutes and we'll slot him in to the conversation. But we're not holding back because, as we say, it's a busy old time. And so let's get the conversation started with Megan Gallagher, MSP for Central Scotland, and Murdo Fraser, MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife, two of the three candidates to be the next Scottish Conservative leader. Thank you both for being here, Megan and Murdo. And as we say, we'll welcome Russell in a few minutes.
Before we get into this, I've got a question. I've been dying to ask Geoff
Take
this,
the floor.
right? Because last time I was on this podcast, Geoff was away gallivanting and wasn't here, so I didn't get a chance to ask him this. But I had an encounter with your former boss, Alec, a few weeks ago. In fact, it was just before summer recess in Parliament. I hadn't seen Alec for 3 years. Last time I saw him was when he came to the Committee of Inquiry into handling of harassment complaints. So we had a really nice catch-up with Alec. And he said, "Oh, it's nice to see you, Murdo." And he said, "We used to have a file on you," is what he said. So, Geoff, what I want to know is, what was in the file?
Well, I think you've covered it already. There's a black mark next to the fact that you were a Rangers supporter. Couldn't be trusted on the back of that. And therefore, we couldn't do deals with you. We had to do deals with Annabelle Goldie instead.
And that was all that was in it?
That was all that was in it.
That's quite a relief then, really.
That's a big file.
I have to say, genuinely, I don't remember any file.
Well, he obviously does.
Salmond had his own
This
one.
is all very Richard Nixon.
I love that. I absolutely love it.
There's no Murdo-gate.
Let's start by considering, I think, the campaign broadly. First of all, I think for me, I wonder if there's a conversation to be had here about the perception of the campaign versus the substance of the campaign. And with that in mind, Megan, let's start with you. Are you proud of how this leadership campaign has unfolded?
No. And the reason I'm saying no is because there has been, and we've all seen it in terms of what's emerged into the papers, there has been bits of blue on blue. I've certainly been at the receiving end of that, as you've probably seen in the papers as well. And, it doesn't make us a united team. And we absolutely need to be a united team, not just because we've got a tough task ahead of us in terms of rebuilding the party. So we're in a good position to fight the next Holyrood election, but also in terms of our MSP grouping as well. We need to make sure that we are a unified team so we can take on the tough challenge of holding not just SNP government to account, but also Labour as well. So I think we need to do better, and that's why I'm not engaging on blue on blue.
That's Murdo. Megan says she's not proud of the way this leadership campaign's unfolded.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it's been a particularly happy experience for some of us. I think there's been a lot of blue on blue attacks. I mean, to be fair, I think all the candidates have got on well with each other, but it's some of the supporters in the background who have been indulging in things in the media and behind the scenes that have not been helpful. And as we know from history, civil wars are always the bloodiest. The difficulty we have is by the time we get to the 27th of September, when we have a new leader in place, we have got 19 months until the Holyrood election in 2026. We can't afford to spend 6 months to a year patching up internal differences. And that's going to make it a bit more difficult for everyone to try and get along.
So, well, I mean, that surely is difficult. What do you do? If this leadership contest is leading to that sort of issue, what is your solution to that?
Well, this comes into my campaign that Geoff mentioned earlier on about resetting, rebuilding and restoring. So we need to reset the relationship, not just with our members, but the people of Scotland as well, in terms of the general election result that we've just had, the reform issue that we've mentioned, and of course what we are going to do to change our party for the better. That's rebuilding our party, because we've got a lot of structures I feel just now don't work. So we need to make sure that we fix those internal structures so we are a better fighting campaign machine when it comes to elections. And then restoring, it comes back to integrity, it comes back to restoring trust with the public. I think that's really important, but also restoring trust within our membership base as well.
Has the leadership contest, Murdo, for you exposed something of a need for really quite foundational changes to be made within the party that perhaps you hadn't realised before?
Yeah, I think the thing that's come out for me is how disengaged the membership feels from a lot of the decisions that were taken by the party. I mean, I know Megan was deputy leader. I should say I exclude Megan from this because I know how excluded Megan felt from any decisions being taken by the party. And there was a sense that there was a group of people at the top of the party taking decisions without involving even the deputy leader, even the shadow cabinet MSPs. And I think a lot of the membership have got really angry. And, we've had a lot of discussion at the hustings around the David Duguid situation, which I thought was incredibly badly handled. And I think he thinks, and I would agree, cost us that seat in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. If he'd been allowed to stand as a candidate, I think we'd have held that seat. That would have given us 6 seats instead of 5, and deprived the SNP of that one victory they had in the general election, in which otherwise was a really dismal night for them. So that's just one example of decisions being taken that the members feel really angry about. And I think if we get anything out of this whole process, we need to have a party structure that involves the membership to a much greater extent, because I think they've just felt excluded.
Yeah. Just on Murdo's last point, very quickly before I make a more substantive point. I think you're absolutely right, Murdo. I mean, I know that area very, very well, the former Banff-and-Buchan seat, and I think the Tories under David Duke would have got a lot of time for, incidentally, would have held on to that seat easily, actually. And that intervention, don't want to go over internal party machinations, certainly not my associated party, but I think he would have held on quite easily. You know, party leadership contests can be really good. They can be exhilarating and they can reinvigorate a party, or they can be destabilizing. And so I was only involved in one. Alex Salmond at the 11th hour came in, much to Mike Russell and Rosanna Cunningham's chagrin, I think, would be safe to say. But he made it clear that should he win, and it became pretty clear that he would win, that they would both play a part in his government should be elected. So he tried very quickly to bring the tent together. If you think about the Miliband brothers and Ed Miliband coming in the back, I think that set Ed Miliband off to the worst possible start. I think there was an immediate distrust amongst the electorate about Ed's leadership because of that. And we've just seen, not that long ago, Kate Forbes and Humza Yousaf. And perhaps you could argue that we're still seeing the remnants of that disagreement playing out today that took place. So it's really important, not that you're going to listen to my advice, that you get your house in order and try and fight the last 3 weeks or so in some degree of civility and unity, because if you don't, you'll just pay the price at the ballot box.
Yeah. It's funny, if you look back to how everything happened with the David Duguid situation, it all really started when Douglas Ross replaced Jackson Carlaw as leader. I mean, and the sort of small group decision making that Murdo was talking about, it kind of goes back to that. A small group of people decided that Douglas Ross should replace Jackson Carlaw. And actually, I actually think Douglas Ross is a pretty good politician, to be honest with you. I just think he's better suited to the style of Westminster than he is Holyrood. And I think he thinks that himself as well, which is why he has, worked pretty hard to try to get back to Westminster. I would probably argue that he probably shouldn't have come up to be leader in the first place at Holyrood. I think he'd be better suited to have stayed at Westminster. I think he'd been very good then. But it was his desire to get back to Westminster that led to all these issues that we're talking about with David Duguid and with the Kathleen Robertson situation that's been in the newspapers as well. But it is a product of decisions that are made by a very, very small group of people. And that has been the case, to be honest, in this party for really quite a long time.
Can you just do one thing? Why it's not Duguid, it's Duguid, isn't it?
It is Duguid. Yeah,
I know it's northeast, but for goodness sake, get it right, man. Right.
So what you're referencing, Andy, was
the Central Belt audience.
Yeah.
was the Daily Telegraph reporting that Douglas Ross met Westminster candidate Kathleen Robertson in July 2023, raising the prospect of him replacing her at the 2024 general election. I think, Megan, it shouldn't go unnoticed that you actually resigned your position as deputy leader of this party in the midst of all of that kind of furore. I mean, that is a huge decision to make, surely, in the context. You must have felt very strongly about that. And do you feel like that has caused any change, any consideration within the party of how things are run, the fact that you felt you had to stand down?
Well, the decision that I'd taken was one of integrity, going back to that point, because I was deeply troubled with what came out in the newspapers. I've got so much time and respect for Kathleen. She's a first-class councillor. She's an excellent council leader. And I was just deeply concerned that these conversations were taking place. So the only thing that I felt that I could do would be to resign my position in order to be able to keep the campaign moving, but also show that we need to look into this matter further. And I've said that publicly on the record as well, in terms of I think that the matter actually needs to be investigated. But, I think in terms of the party structures, this is what I would like to change about the party, because as Murdo mentioned earlier on, the membership are not really involved within the party. And this is how these situations arise, because there's no real structures or processes for complaints, how complaints are dealt with and who people can speak to. And I think that's why, for me, I would like to look at HR systems within the party to make sure that members they can feel supported, they do feel supported. That's something that's really important to me, because Kathleen, of course, is a woman. I'm a woman in politics, and for me to have stood by and allowed a situation where a woman may have been removed from the general election process, I just couldn't stand for it.
Can a leader of the Scottish Conservatives change these things that you're talking about changing, Murdo?
Yeah, so there are mechanisms to do that. I mean, you'd have to go through a process. One of the things I've proposed is having a commission to look at the party constitution and structure, because there are weaknesses in it. I think we need to strengthen the voice of the voluntary party and the grassroots. If you look at Westminster, they've got a 1922 committee, and that is a committee of backbenchers who regularly meet the Prime Minister or the party leader, and they are kind of the voice of the party membership and the grassroots. We don't have anything like that. We've got a party management board made up predominantly of appointees by the party leader. So once you become party leader, you're more or less kind of king of the castle until there's a revolution, which we don't want to encourage, being Conservatives, obviously. And there's very little opportunity for challenge to the leader, that sense of, the men or the women in grey suits. We don't really have that. And similarly, the mechanisms to remove a leader who's not performing well are effectively impossible. You need to get 1,000 members to sign a requisition they want a leadership election. When you've only got 7,000 members, that's practically impossible. In Westminster, there's a very clear set of rules about how you have no confidence in a leader who's not performing. So there's all that stuff I think we have to look at. But as leader, you can't change that. You've got to go through a process and consult the membership and votes of the party membership and a 2/3 majority to make it happen. But it does need to change because, as Andy fairly said, we are living with a legacy of decisions that have been taken in the past.
Let's have a think about, I suppose, what all of that means in the context of this leadership contest. We've talked about divisions. We've talked about changing the party structure. I mean, would you have places for each other in your own kind of shadow cabinet, front bench? I suppose there's a chance after 2026 you might have to, if the numbers are as low as they're going to be, isn't there?
I think whoever wins it is going to have to build a team. And the one thing that's come out really strongly of all hustings that we've had is the party members want to see all the talents in the party brought together. And I think whoever wins it is going to have to build a team. We've only got 31 MSPs. I don't think we should have backbenchers at Holyrood. Let's give everybody a job. Let's give everybody a role. Let's make them feel part of a team. We've had in the last a little while, really talented people like Maurice Golden, who's got, unsurpassed knowledge around issues like net zero and energy efficiency on the backbenches. Jamie Green, really talented, got lots of perceptions around liberal conservatism on the backbenches. These people should be part of a team. They should be given roles, not just left sitting out there in the cold.
What sort of roles?
Well, I mean, Maurice obviously would be an obvious spokesman around things like net zero, climate change. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think of that, Megan? That work for you?
Well, again, it's about building a team, and I'm not going to disagree with Murdo on that, because after this contest is done, I want to see the group come back and be a strong, united team, because we've got to be, because by that point we will be right into the election cycle. We'll be selecting for candidates. We'll be looking at the overall strategy of the campaign that we want to run. So I think we need to make sure that we're pulling the talent in from all different parts of our party, and that's what I want to do as well. I think we've got talent right throughout our MSP group, but as Murdo said, they're not being utilised just now. So let's utilise them. There's excellent party positions that I know that MSPs would want to get involved in, if it's the campaigning elements, or if it would be more policy heavy, which I know, and Murdo's already mentioned, 2 talented colleagues would fit in really well.
Okay. Interesting. Just to say, we are expecting Russell Finlay to join us in the next few minutes. So some of these themes we may well return to when he does join us from Parliament, when he makes his way around the corner in the course of the next few minutes. Shall we consider policy? I think this is perhaps something that is missing a bit from the kind of public discussion because of all the things we have just talked about, and maybe we should hold our hands up to that as well. But I suppose, Andy, I want to come to you first on this in terms of what we're about to hear from Murdo and Megan and Russell when it comes to policy. How should we hear that, given what you've said about where the Scottish Conservative Party is in the context of Scottish politics right now? Why does it matter what policy these guys talk to us about today?
Well, so as I said, I don't think what they say on policy either today or after one of them wins in a few weeks' time is going to have an influence on the result in 2026. That doesn't mean it's not important to talk about it. It is important to put centre-right policy forward. And I think the critical thing about that is that Scotland isn't really any different from any other Western European country, in that there is a very, very significant constituency of people who would, broadly speaking, align with centre-right policy. So I was thinking earlier on, right, because you said this is not my natural territory. Actually, it should be. And if you were in any other country, it would be. So if you cross the water from Aberdein to Norway, you're a member of Hoyer, the centre-right party. You are, right? You're not a member of a party of the centre-left. So if this wasn't Scotland, right?
I'm okay, thank you.
If this wasn't Scotland,
I'm going to school today, apparently.
you wouldn't. This would be natural territory for you, and I think that's the problem, right? It says an awful lot about the position that the Tory party is in. And the position that Scottish politics is in, that there is a very, very significant body of people who are effectively unrepresented, very pro-Scottish people of the centre or centre-right. Don't really have anywhere to go. So it's really important that that's why I think that it still matters that the centre-right party has some representation and says the things it says, because we have to keep those ideas alive, even if it's in a party that I don't think is actually ever going to be in power. We have to keep the ideas alive because there's a very significant constituency that wants to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I reject something you say. I don't know. I'll join whatever political party will invest in Aberdein, right? So we'll do that way.
That is Norway.
Okay, good. Well, they already are. I tell you, but you said something about it doesn't really matter what's said in this election contest. It's not going to have any bearing on 2026 in terms of policy. Well, that really kind of disillusions me, because it should influence your chances at 2026. This is your platform to try and influence 2026. So, one thing I wanted to ask, and I hate myself for doing this because it's paying a bit of homage to the man to my left just now, but I've worked in the Scottish Government for the SNP. I've been on those side of things. We took Labour and yourselves to the cleaners, right? On the back of, you have to look down there to London for your direction. Ultimately, they're your bosses. You're a branch office up here, right? And you're going to hear that a lot before 2026 again, right? Do either of you, and we want to ask Russell this as well, envisage a relationship where you have more autonomy for the Scottish Party, clearly alignment, you're still the Scottish Conservative Party, but more autonomy so that you can take the opportunity to say, no, we're not doing that up here. Because until you, honestly, and same will happen to Anna Sarwar, you watch it over the next 18 months and beyond, until you can honestly say, no, we're here representing the Scottish Party only in this Parliament, and the MPs, I feel that you're in real trouble of being unable to advance to where you want to be.
So can I respond to that? Because I think that's a fair point about autonomy. I think in the past, when we've been in government, it's harder if you're in government. It's easier if you're in opposition. So to give you an example, so EPL, right? I know you're concerned about EPL.
Big fan.
So it's the Energy Profits Levy.
Sorry, Energy Profits Levy. You might have read my article in the Scotsman this morning about this, saying it's a bad idea, should be scrapped. But when Jeremy Hunt announced in the budget back in March, then Conservative Chancellor, he was extending the EPL. To his credit, Douglas Ross came out and said, that's a really bad idea. I don't support that. Now, that articulated the view of the Scottish Conservatives quite rightly, that was against Scotland's interests and we should oppose it. The challenge, of course, for Douglas was he could say that, but for his colleagues who were government ministers, like Andrew Bowie, that would have been a real challenge had it come to a vote in the House of Commons, because he would then have either had to back Douglas's position or lose his ministerial job. Yeah. If you're in opposition, these challenges are not quite so acute. Yeah. But I certainly would like to see whoever becomes leader, whether it's me or Megan or Russell, be able to say on issues like that, we will take a stand for Scotland. So give you another example. I think we should now be arguing for a VAT cut for hospitality. Yeah. Hospitality is overtaxed. Hospitality is proportionately far more important to the Scottish economy than the UK economy. We've got the highest rate of VAT in hospitality in Europe. Let's cut it from 20% to 10% and deliver a real
just for the hospitality sector.
Just for hospitality.
Yeah, so an exemption.
Yeah, deliver a real shot in the arm. We can do that post-Brexit. Yeah. Deliver a real shot in the arm to hospitality and tourism in Scotland. It's a Scotland-Pacific policy that actually would deliver for us. And I would, if I was leader, I would take that to our colleagues in Westminster and say, let's pursue this.
Autonomy, Megan, of the Scottish Party?
Yeah, you've got a good point. And, for me, it's not going to be dissimilar to what Murdo is saying, because, again, we've got a really good opportunity here. We've got 2 leadership election contests happening at the same time. So this is an opportunity actually to look at how it functions. And, we've got excellent colleagues, Westminster, excellent colleagues in the Welsh Senate as well. And I want to strengthen those relationships right up and down the UK. So we're speaking better in terms of a Conservative Party. We're not butting each other's heads. But I think also in terms of what Murdo's saying as well, I think we need to put ourselves into the room. I think when it was previous UK governments, we were very much not in the room at all times, and it meant that we had to firefight a lot of issues here in Scotland. And I think that is a fair comment in terms of what we were responding to on the back of the decisions being taken by the UK government. But this is an opportunity now, because we're going to have a new UK leader, we're going to have a new Scottish leader, and I think there needs to be better workings between all of our parties right across the UK, and I think we can do that quite easily, looking at issues just as Murdo's raised in terms of policies and making sure that we can deviate if it's better for devolution.
Andy, you have some thoughts on the relationship between the kind of UK party and the Scottish party?
I mean, whichever one of the 3 of you win, you're going to stand up at FMQ and you're going to say, I think we should have a VAT cut for hospitality, or we should scrap EPL. And John Swinney's answer is going to be, do you support Kemi Badenoch, who thinks that devolution should be rolled back? That's the answer, because that's how the Tories lose. That's how the SNP managed to leverage support against the Tories, and quite often get the support of lots of centre-right voters, because there is insufficient Scottishness in it, and it is just too easy to point towards somebody like Kemi Badenoch saying devolution should be reversed. Probably a pretty popular position amongst her MP group at Westminster if she wins. And it damages you. And the difficulty is, you can't stop folk watching the 6 o'clock news. You can't stop people in Scotland inhaling the messages that come from the Westminster Conservative Party. So you can have some structural autonomy. You can have theoretical autonomy. But actually, when you've got the same word after your name, that's the problem. But it doesn't get fundamentally different.
So can I just interrupt you very quickly? I mean, I would love to know, do you support the rolling back of devolution?
No.
No, and I would publicly disagree with Kemi Badenoch on that. And even if she became Conservative leader in the UK, now whether that was a throwaway comment or whether there was any substance behind it, but I would seriously, publicly disagree with that view. And the point I was going to make to Andy was, when Ruth was leader, she was not afraid to very publicly disagree with people in the UK government, including Boris on a number of occasions, very vocally. So even though you're part of the same structure, you can create a different identity in exactly the same way. If you look at the Metro mayors in England, people like Ben Houchin and Andy Street before he lost, they were able to develop a brand of conservatism distinct to their area. Ben Houchin's been a huge success in Tees Valley, not a natural conservative voting area, been re-elected twice because he's able to demonstrate he's got a brand of conservatism that works for that particular locality.
So, let me ask you both a question then. If that's the case, if that is okay, then why do we have a situation where you're the official opposition on 31 seats and you're up against a government which has been in power for 17 years and whose popularity, factually, is on the slide? On the slide. So in any other country, you are the opposition party, you're of the different ideological perspective, and the government are struggling. So we'd be sitting here not discussing who's going to be the next leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. This would, in effect, be a de facto discussion about who's going to be the next First Minister, but it isn't, is it? Why not?
Because Scottish politics is always influenced by UK politics, right? When people look at the Conservatives, they think about us at Holyrood, but they also think about the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And if you look what happened in the general election, the decline to 12.7% reflected what was happening elsewhere in the UK, where we had a historic low vote share as well.
And yet they don't in Quebec and they don't in Catalonia and so on. It's different there.
Megan?
But I think it's also about branding, because we have struggled because of things that have happened historically over the course of many Conservative governments. So that's why I'm saying that the resetting of the relationship is going to be integral here, because I think, it has been discussed. There needs to be that ability to, make sure that we've got our own strong messaging here, our own branding here, and our ability to set our stall out as Scottish Conservatives. Yes, we're still part of the UK party, but we need to become distinct. And I think we managed that under Ruth Davidson, but I'm not sure we've managed it since. So that's what I want to do. But that's why it's really important to make sure that we're going to have those discussions to say, right, okay, we've got an opportunity here in Scotland to do something special. How are we going to do it, and how are we going to work collectively as a UK party to make sure Scotland's...
There is a contradiction, though, here between what you're saying. So we're sitting here with if commentators are right and pollings to believe that Kemi Badenoch is potentially the favourite for the UK leader, and you're talking about rebuilding trust, resetting the party, changing the party so it's on a firm footing. How do you rebuild trust when your bosses down south are saying, no, we need to roll this thing back? That's a massive issue. And voters hear that and go, well, these guys don't even believe in this institution when you come up to 2026. So it's not just about disagreeing. Surely there should be some people on the phone that I'm saying, why are you even saying this in the first place? Why is this even a thing? And it happens every single time, particularly with the Conservative Party. Your biggest own goals are always coming from your colleagues down south. I can't understand why you wouldn't formally change the structure, go out there and campaign on it and say, enough's enough. I just don't understand it. You want to truly believe that you can be in government in a position to affect change and to really command respect when you make your VAT changes, maybe to a Labour government down south, then you've got to try and get to government in the first place. You ain't going to do that when you've got people in your own party, senior people in your own party, undermining the process of devolution.
So, of course, I've not spoken to Kemi about it, but, of course, if I win and Kemi wins, that would be the first thing that I would be speaking to her about. And that's how it's got to be done, because we don't know, we're all trying to move pieces in a chessboard here. We don't actually know what's going to happen and who's going to win either here in Scotland or across the UK. So let's wait and see how it plays out. But the assurance I can give you, Geoff, is that I'm not going to bow down to it. And that would be my first thing in terms of discussions with the UK leader.
Who are you backing to be the UK leader?
I'm backing Tom.
And who are you backing, Murdo?
Nobody at the moment.
Because you haven't decided, or you don't want to say it?
They might win.
Exactly, they might win. I'll wait. To be honest, I think I'll wait and see who's in the final two, and then I'll take a view on it. It's a bit pointless at the moment backing somebody who might not even get through to the final cut. Yeah.
Who would you like to see win?
I've a lot. To be honest, the only candidate I know really well personally is Tom Tugendhat, and I really like Tom, but that doesn't mean to say I'm necessarily going to back him.
And what about James Cleverly? He's talking about every confidence that the Tories north of the border will be giving the SNP Labour a trouncing in 2026. Do we think that's possible?
That's the sort of thing that people say when asked that question. And they say it with every conviction. In the same way as we're asked the question, will you be the next First Minister? And we say, of course it will be the next First Minister.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, we've talked about Kemi Badenoch and her devolution comments, James Cleverly being, let's be real, a bit out of touch with the electoral reality of what looks like is going to happen in 2026. I interviewed Mel Stride a few weeks ago. I asked him who among the Scottish candidates he would like to see win. I don't want to be unkind. He didn't know who was running. He just didn't. Bless Mel Stride. There's a joke does the round at Westminster when you say, oh, Mel Stride's running for Conservative leader, and somebody goes, oh, who's she? So there's this kind of weird disconnect, isn't there? And I just wonder if it's this bad as you've been talking about already, if there's any desire from the UK leader to actually bridge the gap. In the same way that you're talking about from this side, is there any willingness from that side to meet you kind of halfway?
Well, look, we've just came out the back of a really heavy election defeat, so I think there is a lot of resetting to be done, but we can't do that when we've got two leadership contests happening side by side. So that's why the leadership contests need to play out, the winners need to be announced, and then the discussions take place from there on in. But I'd imagine that everyone's sort of in their own campaign bubble just now, in terms of they're focusing on their own campaigns, they're focusing on their own messaging, because ultimately, when you put yourself forward, you want to win. So, I'm not trying to, discredit any candidate for not knowing what's happening in other places, because they are focused, particularly UK colleagues, they're focused actually getting onto the ballot, because there's a process for them even to get onto the ballot. We're all on the ballot here in Scotland. You've done Mel Stride a favour there. You've dug it right out. Just to say, I have heard from Russell Finley's team that he is on his way
from just round the corner at Parliament. So lots of these questions we will ask him as well when
If
he
only we
arrives.
could have got a venue that was closer to Parliament.
I'm touching Parliament right now. I think one of the things to mention, there's chamber business kicks off again in about half an hour at the time of speaking, and so we're sort of trying to shoehorn this into your day, for which we're very grateful. So I know that Murdo might have
to go out and rustle in. We could have just bought an armchair and saved some money on the sofa.
we had the lovely sofas brought in just for this. I suppose then with all of this in mind, we have to think about 2026, don't we? And where you guys, who the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, will be. And that is likely to be voting for Anas Sarwar to be First Minister, isn't it, Murdo?
Well, I can't see a circumstance in which we would want to put the SNP back into power. The SNP lose, not the biggest party or lose a lot of seats. Why would we put back into power a nationalist party who I think have done a terrible job over the last 19 years? And we're just seeing in the last couple of days the disaster with the public finances. So if Anas Sarwar came to us, would we have a conversation? Yeah, of course we would. But we're not giving Anas Sarwar a free pass. And if you take out the issue of the Constitution on a lot of issues like, economy or tax or housing policy or land reform, I think the Labour Party are offering no better solutions than the SNP are. So I don't think Anas should be taking us for granted.
You are giving him a free pass. He is going to take you for granted, and he should take you for granted. He's going to take all of you for granted. It doesn't matter which one wins, because ultimately, if you are faced with a choice between a left-wing Labour First Minister and a left-wing SNP First Minister, everybody knows which one you're going to choose. So he can take you for granted, actually, and he will take you for granted.
Geoff is looking
totally disagree. Look. No, hold on a second.
Tell me the circumstances.
You jabbered on for a second. Let me come back on you, right? So, if that poll that was in the Sunday Times was materialised, like all caveats, 18 months away, it's all a bit irrelevant just now, but just imagine that happened, right? And Anas Sarwar is looking to the Liberals. It's not enough to get a majority, and he needs to look to Murdo, Fraser, and Meghan and Russell for votes to get over the line, right? And ahead of a general election at UK, they can name their price. I mean, they can actually make themselves relevant for the first time, potentially, since devolution, properly relevant in that respect. So actually, I don't see it as Anas taking them for granted. What I would challenge is it would be a great position for you to be in, an even better position for the SNP to be in. Because they can just say, vote Labour, get Tory, we've told you, better together, eh? Mark II. Absolutely. I don't see this being as an advantage to Anas. I see this as being an advantage to the Tories.
Name me the circumstance. If that's true, then give me any circumstance in which either Meghan or Russell or Murdo would put John Swinney into government before Anas Sarwar. If there's a circumstance that would happen, then your point is right. If there's no circumstance that they would put John in,
No. I accept your point. On putting, you need to put Anas in first. But at that point, as he's First Minister on a confidence and supply, these guys can name their price.
Meghan?
I know who I'd rather be.
Well, I think I would actually agree, with. Well, we can name our price, and of course we can name our price, because at the end of the day we'll be in a situation where they're either going to be the Queenmaker or the Kingmaker if that poll has to play out. But in terms of local government, if you had to look at councils and what happens in councils, even though council groups work together in order to form administrations, that doesn't usually end up with one party capitalising at the next election either. It's how you set out your stall, whether it's supplying confidence in terms of per vote. It doesn't need to be a package deal that lasts the entirety of the next term of the Scottish Parliament. So it depends how you want to play it out. And, I think there is an opportunity, but, like Murdo, I certainly wouldn't be going unless there was a full price there, that's got to be growing the economy. It's got to be housing. It's got to be support for parents. It's got to be support for people as they grow older in life, and obviously protections as well in terms of, no more GRR legislation, please, or anything like that. I think that's how we need to look at this, and that's certainly what I'd be going in with.
Wow. Andy?
I think Anas Sarwar will eyeball you and say, you do what you want, because he knows you're not going to put a nationalist into Butte House. He knows you're going to put him in.
But even if that's right, and even if he is in Butte House, you still need support to get budgets through. Mm-hmm. You don't need to get support to get legislation through. So I think Geoff's right on this. If we are the Kingmaker, or in fact, we would be Kingmaker because neither of them are female, so we're bound to be Kingmakers.
I was just putting the gender in there.
If we were Kingmaker,
go for Monarch Maker.
It would still give us, for the period of the Parliament, considerable influence, an opportunity to influence policy.
I think
Because
this
you
is
could bring the government down and have another election.
But
with the
hold
SNP
on a
might get back
second.
in.
But this is where my experience of minority government comes back into it, right? And with respect, I have huge
Were you in government?
affinity with Annabel Goldie and all the rest of it. I mean, it was in that, you're unfair in that, because Annabel Goldie recognised that actually, politically, at a UK level, it was better to have the SNP, would you believe it or not, I believe anyway, than the Labour Party in Holyrood, because that paved the way for the 2010 election, David Cameron and all the rest of it. So I accept the point. I was maybe being a bit funny and playing with you, but at the end of the day, we fought as a minority government with a plurality of one, with a bit of a confidence and supply with the Greens. And we fought on an issue by issue basis. So that's what Anna Sarwar would have to do. You'd still be in the box seat. I don't disagree with you, but with these guys, just in the run-up to a general election, if the politics dictated and the context was such, could name their price. And when Anna said no, and it costing an election in that context, as long as the Tories play their tactics, and this is where the tactics of minority government come in, of course, then you could come out the eventual winners. Now, it's not an easy ask, but I don't think it's safe to say that Anna Sarwar would take you for granted. I think that's a bit simplistic.
So, answer me this. Who's more likely to be Deputy First Minister? The winner of this contest or Alex Cole-Hamilton?
Well, I suppose if those numbers are to be replicated, again, all caveats apply, then I think it would make sense to still form a coalition with the Liberals and put Alex Cole-Hamilton, even if you don't have the majority, because there's a sense of unity in a different government. That would make it harder.
Because you have political permission
but you'd
to
still
do a deal with the Lib Dems, but you don't have political permission to do a deal with the Tory.
Yeah.
That's the reality of life in that building behind us.
Okay.
Megan?
I know I'm just going to side with Geoff on it. Sorry, Andy, but I mean,
Oh no, well, Megan, don't.
because at the end of the day, you know, he doesn't want a situation where there's a breakdown in relationship with another party as well. And I think it is just too simplistic to say that the Lib Dems will just go along with whatever, because they'll have asks as well. So I think it's how we approach it. But I think there will, of course, be discussions among all political parties come the next Holyrood election, because there's all different movements now. This isn't just a straightforward election campaign where you know the SNP is going to win, but by how much. So it's a completely different election we're going to be walking into, because we don't even know how the formations are going to operate and how it's going to work out. So I think there is a deal to be made. It's just how you approach it.
Interesting. When does the groundwork for a deal like that start, Murdo? If you were to become leader?
It actually starts earlier than you think. Once the parties start setting out their policy positions, what you then need to do is have people looking at that and work out where there are areas of overlap, where there are areas of difference, what are the things that could conceivably be delivered on some sort of joint agreement.
Russell Finlay, who is MSP for West Scotland, joins us. Welcome.
Hello.
How was the Justice Committee today?
It was very interesting. It was all about the fire service.
Oh, right, okay.
And we had both trade unions in, and we had the Chief Fire Officer, who, despite the fact he's retiring next month, wasn't willing to throw a sufficient number of rocks. I was hoping he would. But nonetheless, all very interesting. And they all seem to be in full agreement that chronic, sustained underfunding is a real problem. And the issue of decontamination for firefighters is something that is really urgent and pressing.
Decontamination.
So when they go out on jobs, they come back with kit that's filthy, and it's been found through various scientific studies that not only is this stuff harming them, but evidence of it's been found within their homes, within their children's bedrooms.
Wow.
And it's going to be a huge issue. It is a huge issue. And there's a growing recognition that this needs to be dealt with. And it involves properly washing the kit, having sufficient kit to be able to have replacements, and having the facilities within fire stations to ensure people are immediately cleaned of the chemicals and so on.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, very often the work of Parliament happening on the podcast as well. Russell, thanks very much for joining us. You're joining the conversation just as we're talking about if you were to become the Scottish Conservative leader, what price you would put on a deal to prop up Anna Sarwar as First Minister.
Well, the largest possible price, but I mean, the starting point is for us to win as many votes and as many seats and MSPs in the Parliament as we possibly can. We've defied all the kind of predictions the last time around, and I think that with the right policies and the right leadership and the right communication, showing people in Scotland that we're on their side, we shouldn't be going into this thinking that we're going to be the bridesmaid necessarily.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Yeah. In terms of, and just to stay with you just for a second, what do you mean by the highest price possible? Let's try and unpack exactly what that means.
Well, it is a little bit premature, but I
Do you think?
Do
Do you think you'll be First Minister?
do I think I'll be First Minister?
Yeah.
Well, as I said to Colin Mackay, that if Hamza Yusuf can be First Minister, then we've all got a fighting chance, don't we?
That's a politician's answer if I've ever heard one.
No, I mean, we all give a similar answer to that question. We're not expecting to be First Minister in 2026. You would probably take us away in a straitjacket if we said that. But there should not be a limit to our ambition. We don't want to just change our party. We want to change our country. That's why I'm involved in politics. And I think that one day it's not unreasonable to aspire for a Scottish Conservative First Minister.
Just while then we're talking about 2026 and the election then, should we talk about Reform UK, which according to the Sunday Times polling from just a couple of weeks ago, they would win 8 MSPs, mostly at the expense of your party, and your representation would go down to 18. Notably, also, Reform UK got 7% of the vote in the general election just passed. How much do you fear Reform UK, Murdo?
Okay, so the latest polling last week had them at 12% for Westminster, so actually is even more stark. I don't fear them, but they are a challenge to us. And then my response to it is, I think it would be a mistake for us to try and embrace that kind of Nigel Farage agenda, because I think many of the people voting Reform or saying they're going to vote Reform are doing so out of frustration, because they are people, not all of them, but a number, who were Conservative voters who feel utterly disillusioned. In fact, Russell and I had an experience on the doorstep just a few days before the general election. We were canvassing in Bankfoot, and we met this chap who had been voted Conservative all his life, and he said, "No, I'm voting Reform." And I said to Russell, "Let's have a go at this guy." We were there for 10 minutes trying to persuade him, and failed. I have to say,
10 minutes for one vote.
I have to say,
didn't win.
But he was really interesting, and he said, "I've always been a Conservative, but this time round, I'm voting Reform because I want to punish you. I want to punish you because you've let me down, because you as a party haven't delivered on your promises, and the behaviour of people like Boris Johnson has really disappointed me." And he said, "I might well come back and vote for you again in the future, but this time round, this is my chance to send you a message." So we get these people back, I think, by demonstrating we're proper Conservatives and will deliver on our promises and will lead with some honour and integrity.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's helpful showing how ineffective we were in between us not persuading one voter.
Yeah, both of us have won.
I think Megan, you're all in.
No, but we were actually taking it in turns, because the suggestion was this chap was going to vote Reform, and we were both determined to persuade him otherwise. But I think when we got to about attempt 4, and he said he intended to sink the boats, I think we thought we've lost him at this point.
Sink the boat.
Yes.
The thing is, though, that guy is speaking to you in the context of a UK general election, where the entire news agenda is dominated by asylum seeking, by small boats and so on. I know what that Norstat poll is saying. I would be really, really surprised if Reform's vote share was anything like that in the Scottish Parliament, or 9 seats. It's just the campaign is not going to feature the sort of issues that is making Mr. Bankfoot decide he wants to vote for Reform. He probably will vote for you again, I think, in 2026. I think the polling will start to tail off on that.
And also, there's a huge protest vote in the last election with the Reform vote from not just our party, but other parties.
I mean, you were at the start, Russell, but I was pointing out in the West Lothian by-election was almost 20% for Reform UK, and the Tories were put into 5th place. I think there is a reservoir there for you to tap into, but it does take you to have a credible platform and a credible message, which we've been exploring a bit today. How convinced are you that you can establish a leadership portfolio or position that can, and again, we've discussed this briefly, take on your bosses at Westminster and try and establish some degree of autonomy for the party at Westminster, at Holyrood?
Well, it's not unhelpful that we're not in government at UK level. I think whoever comes into the leadership role of the UK party, and indeed the Scottish party, needs to work closely together with respect and try and reach constructive disagreement where necessary. There should be nothing wrong with us diverging due to the significant powers in the Scottish Parliament and all these devolved issues. And I think it's achievable and vitally important, as long as this stuff's done privately and we avoid public flare-ups. I think that's important. Yeah.
Interesting about avoiding public flare-ups, Russell. At the start of this podcast, we asked Murdo and Meghan whether they were proud of this leadership campaign, generally speaking. And actually, Meghan said she wasn't proud. Murdo said it's not been a happy experience. Are you proud of the campaign?
I think, yes, I am very proud. I've maintained a wholly positive campaign. It's all
What
about
the campaign
setting out...
overall, though?
Well, the campaign overall, I've never been experienced, and I've never been involved in one. I think the party desperately, it was evident from the outset when we knew there was going to be a new leader. There was a huge outcry, the demand for a contest, which I fully agreed with immediately, because a lot of the membership and a lot of the parliamentarians have felt frustrated. They felt not listened to, not heard. And I think that has been a healthy process. I think the fact everybody has been given an equal platform to talk about the issues that they want to see progressed, the platform they want to develop and build. And the membership, quite rightly, will have their say. It's one member, one vote.
Would you have space on the front bench for these two?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Murdo wants there to be no backbenchers at all. Do you like that idea?
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, look what Hamza Yusuf did. He created, I think, the biggest government since devolution, by perhaps making many promises that he couldn't keep, or he did keep actually, to the cost of the taxpayer. I think what we need to do as a team, there are 31 of us, there's a breadth of talent across all sorts of areas, out with politics as well as within. And we just, the sensible thing for any leader to do is make best use of those talents.
Let's discuss, Meghan, your tweet from the 1st of September. I've got the screen grab of it here. It's been brought to my attention that a senior member of the party has been calling members to suggest that I'm about to withdraw from the contest and back another candidate. This is completely untrue, and I will continue setting out my vision to reset, rebuild and restore our party. How did you become aware of these phone calls that were happening?
It was through party members. So, again, I was, deeply disappointed that had happened. But, that's why I put out the tweet, because I wanted to reassure my supporters, people who had backed me and endorsed me, and I put hours into my campaign that I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to see this through and hopefully become leader on the 27th of September. But, again, that's why I'm not engaging on blue. I put out the tweet to make sure that would be the end of it. And thankfully it has.
Do you know who was making the phone calls?
I'm not getting into the blue on blue.
Sure. I don't want you to name them, but do you know who it was?
Yeah.
You do. Russell, is that the sort of campaigning that you're proud of?
Well, that's nothing to do with me.
I'm not, sorry, excuse me, I'm not suggesting it is. I'm talking about the campaign generally. If that's the sort of thing that is happening, that a senior member of the party is calling members to make a false suggestion about Meghan's campaign.
I think
that's what I mean about the broad campaign.
The question was being proud of the campaign, and I was talking about the pride that we're all out there making a pitch, engaging with members. The democratic process within the party is alive and kicking, and long may that continue. And I am absolutely proud of the campaign I've conducted. I've refused to get involved in blue and blue, or indeed react to blue and blue. I'm incredibly proud of the fact so many parliamentary colleagues have seen the positive message and supported me, and members across Scotland, and they're doing so because they can see that I am offering something that can actually bring the party forward and put us in the front foot going to 2026.
What would define a Murdo Fraser Scottish Conservative leadership?
We need to be bold and radical, right? So going back to the conversation we had about reform, Andy made an interesting point earlier. If we're at 12%, reform are at 12%, that's a quarter of the Scottish population, potentially with an interest in centre-right policies. Now, we're going to be fighting for space, right, between two left of centre parties in the Labour and the SNP. You've got reform. Now is not the time with 19 months to go for us to sit on our laurels. That's why, for example, I've said, let's use Holyrood tax powers to reduce the tax burden in Scotland. Let's turn this whole debate on its head around tax. We know, because I speak to people in business all the time, the higher taxes in Scotland are acting as a drag on Scotland's economic potential. People in the finance community, people in manufacturing, even people in the NHS can't attract people with talent to come to Scotland because they don't want to be paying higher taxes than the rest of the UK. Let's turn this on its head. Let's make Scotland a place with a lower tax regime that's going to attract investment and attract talent. I was being criticised in the Daily Record last week for saying I wanted to give tax breaks to millionaires.
Must be unusual to be criticised.
Yeah, well, exactly. I've always been criticised in the Daily Record as a badge of honour.
Apart from your Rangers support.
You had to get that in. But I want to see more millionaires in Scotland. Think if we could attract 10 billionaires to move to Scotland, it would transform our tax take overnight. It would give us millions more to spend on public services. So let's just turn this debate on its head and let's not be shrinking violet.
Just very quickly on that, is that something you both agree with?
Wholeheartedly, yes.
Yeah, lowering income tax.
we've
So let's turn it on its head then.
Right.
What would you cut? It's a year-on-year budget. Remember, it's a fixed budget within the Scottish Parliament. So where would you find the money?
Well, you just need to look at the Auditor General's back catalogue of reports into just about every single devolved portfolio to see the waste. It's not unusual for him to say that he can't find out where money's been spent. And when he can find out, too often it's been spent very, very badly. I mean, I think there's significant sums to be achieved through efficiency alone. Reform of public services. I think going into 2026, we shouldn't make up policy in the hoof, but we should certainly be bold, as Murdo says, in respect of what a reformed Scotland could look like in terms of public services.
Also, you don't need to do this in one leap either. So there's a number of interventions you can make on the economy that will drive economic growth. A signal on reducing the tax burdens. One, planning. Planning is a huge barrier to economic development in Scotland, and I don't even mean the structure of planning law. It's the administration of planning. The fact everything takes so long. Housing policy is driving away investment, hundreds of millions of pounds of investment being lost because of the rent controls and rent cap. An insane idea that's causing havoc in the housing market. There are a number of interventions you can make that will drive economic growth, so drive up the tax take.
Let Megan come back. Sorry,
I do agree with all of that, but actually what we're seeing just now in Scotland is that because our economy is lagging so much behind the rest of the UK, we don't have that additional revenue. I mean, since 2019 we've lost, I think it's 6,000 odd businesses from Scotland. That's got a huge impact on actually local economies right up and down the country. So there's a lot that we need to do in terms of business support as well, and making sure that people actually want to set up within Scotland. So that's another avenue that I certainly want to tap into, because it's about growing as well. And I also want to look at exports, making sure that Scottish produce is on shelves right across the UK. I did make a comment about a square sausage on a different podcast that everyone is taking in good turn, but there is a serious point to it actually. It's about having Scottish produce, because our biggest trading partner is the rest of the UK. Let's make sure we've got our Scottish produce right across the UK and all of our shelves.
Just to say that at this point, Murdo Fraser is heading to Parliament. This is the sort of day we're having today. It's great. He's got a question to ask.
We operate here.
Yeah, he's got a question to ask in about 10 minutes at the time of speaking. So thank you to Murdo for taking part. He's had to dart off. Go on, Andy.
This is what I think we should all, whether we are Conservatives or whether we're in the centre-right or whether we're just citizens, I think this is what should actually frustrate us all a little bit about the campaign. Because what we've just heard there in the last few minutes are three people who actually, I think, I've got obviously a reasonable amount of knowledge of this, get on pretty well with each other, have actually interacted really well in this. I think this is probably the only discursive setting like this that you probably will have during the whole campaign, right? And are saying things in terms of policy. I've read a lot of Russell's policy pamphlets. I think there are things in there that a very significant proportion of people in Scotland would actually agree with, right? A lot of them will be lost when they see the party name after them. We've had that discussion a bit before. We might have it a bit again. But a lot of people agree with those things. And I think that is where I think everybody should feel the frustration, because all the crap in the press and the blue on blue stuff is, I don't think, and as I say, I've got a reasonable amount of knowledge, I don't think it's being done by any of these three individuals. I really, really don't. I don't think it's being done by any of them. I think it's being done by others who are nest feathering, to be honest with you. And I think that's a big problem that this party has experienced for a very, very long time. It's not new, actually. It's more intense in this campaign than I've probably ever seen it, but I don't think it's new. But I think that is ultimately the frustration we've got here. Murdo talks about 12% for Reform and 12% for the Tories. That's still only a quarter. That's still only junior partnership and a coalition material. It's not actually winning, right? It's not getting to the point where it's 40+% of people who probably agree with most of the policies,
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the 2021 manifesto, for example, there was some research done after the event where the various parties' manifestos were looked at, and ours was considered most favourably by those being polled.
Yeah.
So they do like what we have to say, and I think we need to find a better way of saying it, a better way of selling it, and that's the job of the new leader. And I think, if you look back at Ruth Davidson era, she breached thresholds that were previously considered unbreachable. And I'm an optimist. I think you wrote recently in The Spectator that it doesn't matter who wins this, which I thought was slightly pessimistic. Didn't really make me bounce in my step that morning. I think it does matter. I think it really matters because even if the route to some form of power is like Everest and there's no obvious path to all us very smart political people, the ambition should be there because there is an electorate out there already who see us in that parliament for the past decades standing up to the damaging and divisive SNP.
So that was actually before you arrived at the start. I sort of addressed that issue in the Ruth Davidson era, and I don't actually think there's any history of the individual leader influencing the vote that this party gets. Mm-hmm. I suppose I would say let's sit and have a beer after the election in 2026 and see if that stacks up. I think that all three of you would put forward a very, very credible centre-right platform, but frankly, I don't think it'll actually make any difference to the overall vote because I think it is determined by other factors.
But if the leader doesn't matter in our party, therefore it doesn't matter in other parties in the same way?
Well, I don't think that.
No,
okay. I don't. I think this is a unique situation for a party which has ideas that do resonate, exactly as you said with that 2021 manifesto. But the overarching influence on this party's vote in the last 10 years has been whether or not independence has been on the table. And now it's not. That's why July happened. It was the same Douglas Ross that got 31 seats and the highest vote share ever in 2021 that got 12.5% in 2024. And it's purely because in 2021, independence was an extremely significant prospect. It was on the manifesto for the SNP. People were worried about it. Boris Johnson was still...
Well, it was on page 1, line 1 of their manifesto this year,
Yeah, but nobody thought it was credible.
Well,
because it's gone from being a first, second or third priority to an 11th, 12th or 13th priority. And that's why a lot of people voted Labour, both from the Tories and from the SNP, because everybody in the population knows independence is dead.
But that was more, I think, to do with the record in government of both governments.
Yeah. Can we just very briefly, if I may, we're running out of time, but obviously one of the most iconic and significant things the Conservative government did, for good or for bad, depending on your position, was Brexit. So Keir Starmer's been travelling the European continent trying to make good on better relations with his European partners. We'll see how that manifests itself, whether it does have closer alignment with the EU or the single market. But I suppose my question to you is, what Brexit benefit would you miss the most if we did go back into the single market or into the European Union?
Well, it's interesting that we've now got sort of many right-of-centre governments in Europe, and the SNP still seem very fond of joining their new friends in the EU. I didn't vote for Brexit, but unlike some other politicians and other parties, I respect the outcome of the democratic process. I accepted the moment that was just the vote outcome was known, that's what would happen and that's what should happen. What happened in the following years, the length of time it took and all the damage that was caused was really painful to watch, but we are where we are. As for Brexit benefits, I can't say there's a huge obvious list of those to many of us, but I think the one loss would be if you rejoined the EU and if you were tied to all sorts of EU rules and regulations, that would presumably have a negative impact on trade deals that have been achieved out with the EU.
So, I mean, we have been able to open dialogue with other countries, and I think that is important. I'm going back to my trading here. I'm not going back to square sausages, but going back to the trading. And it is about, making sure that we can look to other countries and have good trading arrangements. But I'm not going to say that Brexit has been plain sailing. It absolutely hasn't. And we all understand that. I think as Scottish Conservatives, we do understand that. I didn't vote for Brexit either. I was a Remainer. But actually, what I want to see and what I would be happy to work with the next government on would be to bring back the Erasmus scheme for our young people. That's something that I genuinely do want to see, because again, it's about opportunities, it's about aspiration, it's about young people, making sure that they've got good relationships with other countries right across Europe. That's what I'm about. So I'm actually looking now to see what can we do to make those improvements for young people, and the Erasmus scheme is absolutely one of them for me.
Couple of loose ends, just to tie up then. Russell, just a couple of questions that you missed. Who are you backing to be the UK leader of the Conservative Party?
I've decided to sit that one out. I think it's sensible not to back anyone, because whoever wins on
They're all
both
as bad as
sides,
each other,
we have
is that
to
what
work
you're
with each
saying?
other. No, that's not what I'm saying. They're all as good as each other. I can't choose. They're so good.
So good you can't choose. Yeah, fair enough.
Those three were just so bountiful talent.
So you vote for me then, Russell, yeah?
Nice, well played. And then the other thing, so just before Murdo went, I wanted to try to capture what like his vision was for a Murdo Fraser leadership, and I think it's right that we ask you the same thing. What does that look like if Megan Gallagher, if Russell Finlay becomes leader of the Scottish Conservative Party? How would that be defined?
It would be reset, rebuild, restore, because that's the first thing we've got to do, is reset that relationship, rebuild the party, restore trust with the public, and platform offering. I've got my 5 Ps. So it's, I know, I seem to go with R's and P's, but anyways. So it's pockets, parents, properties, pensioners and protections, and that's my policy platform.
That's your own envisaged PR system.
Absolutely.
There we are. Yeah, I've just done it there for you.
No, I was going to say, politicians always run a risk if they have a list that they forget one of them on the way through.
I've been practicing.
Well played. And Russell, same question. What is that vision?
Well, my only R's for Russell, and the only P I've got is for party leader.
Oh, very good. You had time, though. You had time.
It just came to me. But no, I think fundamentally we remind our membership that we are listening to them. We try and unite the party, build the party, and come up with credible centre-right conservative policies relating to education, the economy, housing, transport, health, you name it, and persuade people of Scotland to take that message to every community, the places where we do well already and the places where we're considered not likely to ever do well, and not be shy in the limit of our ambition and showing people that what we've got to say resonates with them.
Thank you both very much. Thank you for being here. Russell Finlay, Megan Gallagher, and of course our thanks to Murdo Fraser as well. They are the candidates, the contenders to be the next leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. Your response to what you've heard on this podcast would be very welcome, actually. Do you feel persuaded? If you're a Conservative member, do you feel like they're speaking to you? And if you're not, do you feel like you could be included in this sort of centre-right vision that you've heard outlined by the 3 candidates on the podcast today? You can email us, of course. The email address is hello@holyroodsources.com, and we will talk to you again soon.